In the 1800s, liberalism and nationalism were a driving force of political and economic turmoil in Europe. Liberalism changed the government forever. It gave the people more representation. Nationalism drove Italy and Germany together and unified the people into unifying the country, but at the cost of starting a lot of bloody wars. Now, there's a lot of questions gleaming over this time period, like what are the concepts of liberalism and nationalism, and what these two concepts change about government in Europe.
The shift to liberal ideas really started with the Enlightenment, ideas which the scientific revolution created. The scientific revolution brought about new philosophies concerning nature and human reasoning, and the development of these ideas spilled into the Enlightenment. These new beliefs advocated for trusting human reasoning and ideas based on observation, therefore contributed to a new sense of equality among people. Everyone could reason, therefore no one was better than anyone else. This idea would slowly grow into the liberalist philosophies of the 19th century. It also created a strong case against absolute monarchy, where the rulers were believed to be better than commoners, having been appointed by God to the throne. But if everyone was really the same because everyone saw and interpreted the world in the same way, then absolute monarchy was unfounded and unjust. This philosophy would go on to inspire the new ideas about the way the government should be structured.
These new ideas would spark revolutionary change throughout Europe, starting with France. The French revolutions of the 18th century began the movement toward liberal reform of the government. The reform was a new idea for Europe, as it was the first large movement toward the reform enacted by common people. The news of the success of the French Revolution spread throughout Europe and inspired many other oppressed people to take action against their own governments.
Meanwhile, in England, another revolution took place, the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution started in the late 18th century, and it ended in the 19th century. It was a time in Europe when it began producing mass numbers of products and moved away from small home-owned manufacturers. Liberal ideas furthered the revolution. Liberalism also helped by creating national workshops. National workshops were these houses where unemployed, poor people, working class mostly, lived in for free. This was also influenced by liberalism in the Industrial Revolution.
Liberalism became a new power within Europe by having the idea of giving its power back to its people, not just to one man. Although there were instances of reinstating an absolutist monarchy, these instances were short-lived and ended after the revolutions of 1848. Liberalism had given these people a taste of what a representative government would be, and after a taste of such freedom, they were not going back. A more extreme version of this view of representative government is socialism, the idea that the public has partial control over property, commodities, and manufacturing. Communism takes this idea a step further by wishing to eradicate government control entirely. Socialism and communism were too extreme for liberals, and who found it hard to cooperate with people under these philosophies.
After the French Revolution, Europe had a real problem on its hands. Napoleon had expanded France so much that there was no longer a balance of power. This balance of power was important for maintaining the peace between nations. In order to recreate this balance, many of the European powers met at the Congress of Vienna in 1814. Among the countries attending were Britain, Russia, Austria, Prussia, and France.
The actual meeting was a little unsuccessful. Real business was delayed for some time by pleasantries. The larger problem, however, was the conservative nature of the proceedings. The European powers partaking in the Congress largely ignored the new liberal and nationalist ideas emerging in Europe. They feared for the safety of their empires. Instead, the Congress, led by Austria's Clemens von Metternich, stuck to conservative practices of restoring old monarchies in order to rebalance Europe.
These conservative practices offered a practical approach to creating a peaceful Europe. However, the people's wishes for a representative government were largely ignored. Plus, countries that had been more liberal before were then forced to change back to old conservative ways, under law this time. The smoldering political discontent, coupled with worsening economic conditions, led to uprisings throughout all of Europe. France had led the first successful revolt, which then inspired other revolts in Austria, the Italian states, the German states, Denmark, Schleswig, Hungary, Western Ukraine, Belgium, Greater Poland, and Ireland. These revolutions showed just how unstable Europe was and how much power the people now held.
Along with the discontent over the government, another part of the problem of this new ordering of Europe was the borders. Throughout Europe, people began to identify themselves based on their ethnicities. This was the emerging idea of nationalism, the idea that people who lived within the same geographic area shared a cultural identity seen through their common history and common language. It heightened a sense of separation between cultures by stressing their historical differences and began to pair cultures based on their respective geography. This developing idea of belonging to a specific group led people to desire countries that would represent their cultural identities. What ensued was a large reshaping of Europe. Pure nationalism drove most of the formation of new states. Patriotic men in power, such as Garibaldi and Bismarck, helped rally the masses to fight for the unification of their countries. In contrast, the Ottoman Empire dissolved due to nationalism, as it was based on political agreements rather than the wishes of the people. Citizens were set on creating nation-states representative of their ethnicities.
Nationalists began their movement in uniting and forming nations in the 1850s. One of the very first countries to succeed in doing this was Italy. Italy had been successful because of its nationalist leaders. These leaders consisted of Counts Cavour, Giuseppe Garibaldi, Giuseppe Mazzi, and King Emmanuel II. The unification of Italy started with a small state known as Sardinia-Piedmont that ended up unifying all of Italy. Sardinia wanted to unify Italy because nationalists wanted the small autocratic principalities united into a single state. Count Cavour of Sardinia had made a plan in order to unify Italy. During the Crimean War, Sardinia allied with France in hopes that France would repay a favor by helping them unify Italy. The northern territories were occupied by Austria, but Sardinia easily captured them because of the Austrian-Prussian War.
After taking these states in 1859, Cavour was able to unify most of northern Italy because of his success in improving economic conditions. Later that year, most of northern Italy had unified with Sardinia, all except for the Papal States, which was led by Pope Pius IX, who was strongly against any nationalist movement. This next year, Garibaldi used a nationalist outbreak in Sicily to take control with his red shirts, then stormed north through Italy, uniting with Cavour, surrounding the Papal States. Cavour and Garibaldi knew that invading Rome would be bad for Sardinia, and waited it out. And their patience was rewarded in 1870 when the Franco-Prussian War drew out French troops that were occupying Rome, letting Sardinian troops invade and unify Italy. Because of Cavour's actions, he took a major step forward in creating the Europe that we know today.
German unification took around the same time as the Italian unification. Otto von Bismarck led the unification. He united the southern Germany with northern Germany by using a policy called blood and iron. This policy was by waging war on others by uniting Germany by force. This policy was very effective as it united Germany from war, and it made the German people basically have pride in their own country.
And nationalism continued to shape Europe even after these revolts. Movements for ethnicity-based representation were still active, changing Europe once again during the 20th century, with the creation of the Irish Republic and the formation of nation-states along the Russian borders, such as Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia.
In short, nationalism brought the nations of Europe together, and liberalism changed the power structure in Europe, and it gave the people more representation.